morning again. It gives me a chance to say hello twice. How about that? My name is Dee George. I serve here at UPO as the Director of Affordable Housing, and ADUs fall into my areas of responsibility. I have the immense pleasure tonight to be joined by three fantastic speakers. Our co-sponsor, Cheryl Court, who will be talking about an intro to ADUs and zoning. Thank you, Cheryl. Cheryl is Policy Director with CSG. And then we have Architect Extraordinaire, Elena Schindler, who's going to be talking about design, documentation, and permitting, things you want to and must know when you're going through to get your ADU up and running. And finally, we also are welcoming tonight Ernesto Warren. Thank you, Ernesto, for joining us. He's going to be talking about what zoning allows you to do to get an ADU. And so without further ado, I'll walk you guys through a few slides and introduce our esteemed panel. So tonight, we'll be starting off with just talking about UPO. For those that don't know who I represent, UPO is DC's designated community action agency. Our mission here at UPO is uniting people with opportunities. We are educators, we are dream builders, we are opportunity makers. We believe that everyone deserves a chance to pursue and live a sustainable, successful life. And we create those paths that start the journey from independence to self-sufficiency and economic independence. And we are a United Planning Organization. Our goal with affordable housing is to influence the production and policy to provide additional affordable housing homes in the district. Our target in support of the mayor's goals is to provide and support an additional 500 units in 5 years. For ADUs specifically, what we'll be talking about tonight, we work with our partners to make it easier, specifically for low and moderate income households to own, build, rehab an accessory dwelling unit, an ADU, or a second unit in their basement or backyard. And if I need to increase the volume, please let me know. Just give me a thumbs up. So what is our first stop here at UPO? Our first stop was collaborating with CSG, with Cheryl, who will be presenting tonight. And our founding corporate sponsor, thank you, City Development, City Community Development via Citibank, funded our pilot series where we guided 2 homeowners through their ADU construction and delivery. One is in process. One has delivered. We held some workshops. And most importantly, I think we also created a manual of best practices that really serves as a model for ADUs for other regions across the country. This has influenced the pledge of an additional $1.5 million from DC government to develop more ADUs. Now, DC government is currently planning how that funding will be allocated. We don't know yet when it will be launched. We are actively advocating for that. And once that is launched, we will be sure to let you and everyone know. Well, overall, if you're looking for the best practices manual on ADUs that UPO and CSG developed, it is on our website, and I believe it's also on CSG's website, if I'm not mistaken. It's on CSG's website as well. Later on, I will drop at the end of the panel discussion, I'll drop the link into the manual so that folks have access to that manual. Tonight, this event has been designed to provide insight into how homeowners can build an accessory apartment or a second unit on their property. Important note, in 2016, there was a zoning update that basically permitted, as a matter of right, an accessory apartment in most single-family zones. Cheryl will be speaking more about that, as well as the use of an existing garage or carriage house as a second dwelling in row homes or in row house zones. Our goal, as always, is to help low and moderate home owners take advantage of this opportunity to generate wealth and provide additional housing units, additional affordable housing units. I would like to thank Citi for their founding support for this innovative affordable housing and wealth building initiative. I will also like to introduce Elena Schindler and Ernesto, and then I'll give the reins to Cheryl Court. to take over. Eliana is an architect practicing in DC and is one of the more experienced, some might say the most experienced architect, in specializing in designing and permitting ADUs in the district. We are grateful to have her on board today to help us understand what's involved in designing an ADU and how architects in general can really help with the process, especially for folks that don't know where to go, where the first step is. Eliana is also the author of a new book, Housing for Humans. It's a book that discusses housing innovation and additional dwelling units. It's available wherever books are sold. Ernesto Warren is the zoning technician with the Office of the Zoning Administrator at Dcra. We appreciate you, Ernesto, for your willingness to join us this evening to explain how zoning regulations work. None of us do, maybe except Cheryl, and how we can apply that to get us from start to finish to getting an ADU. And Cheryl is our co-sponsor. She is the policy director for Coalition of Smarter Growth, CSG. She and her organization, CSG, have advocated and pushed for zoning changes to permit accessory dwellings, and she'll be sharing those next steps on how we can implement those for homeowners. As I hand off, I would urge all of our listeners to please use the chat to pose any questions, and we'll get to those at the end of our speakers' presentations. And we'll also open up for some question and answers at the end with time permitting. That being said, Cheryl, I will turn it over to you. I'll stop sharing now.
Thanks so much, Dee Dee. We're really excited to have a full house, as it were, a virtual full house. And let me put this into, let me start at the beginning. I'm Cheryl Court with Coalition for Smarter Growth. We've been working on accessory dwelling units from the time that we promoted them in the zoning rewrite to today, just trying to make this an understandable process for people. What's important to know about the 2016 zoning update is that there were three major kind of housing types changes that were enacted. One was single family zones. The R residential house zone permits one accessory apartment as a matter of right. It requires that property be owner occupied in either the main house or the accessory unit. And that in row house zones, moderate density row house zones, the residential flat or residential apartment zones permit one dwelling in the garage or carriage house. And that was new. You couldn't, until now, that wasn't allowed. And then also alley lots also can be used for a home. The map on the right is of R zones. It's the lowest density single family residential zone in the city. And you see it sort of skirts it rings the outer part of the city. And then I also just wanted to put a map of residential flat zone, which is this moderate density row house zone, which it's kind of basically slightly different rules if you're building a basement apartment or creating an apartment in a carriage house. And so for the RF zone, they typically allow for 2 units. And with the 2016 zoning reforms, the second principal dwelling is allowed now to be in the garage or carriage house, but it's technically not an accessory dwelling unit. So we won these reforms in 2016. And then we had to sort of take on the task of, well, how do we remove barriers and educate and support homeowners being able to build these units, because these are all folks who just own a home and are interested in doing this. It's not something they do every day like a developer. So we worked on removing barriers in terms of understanding zoning and permitting and financing. We did a lot of education. There's an online forum which you're all welcome to join. You can go to smartergrowth.net/ADU to find out how to sign up for that Google group. And we then also partnered with UPO on these pilot efforts with homeowners and produced a manual. Hold on here. So we produced the manual. I recommend that. We are going to be updating that. And in fact, I'll be sharing something with you that'll be an important update for that. I'll post it on our website. But I just really want people to understand, just kind of have some illustrations to understand how zoning works, because it's just hard for people to figure it out. So we have three main residential zones: the R zone, the RF zone, and the RA zone. The main ones that you probably think about is the R zone, the residential house zone, which is a single family zone, and then the residential flat zone, which typically allows 2 principal dwellings per building, basically. And so it's the putting in a second unit in the R, the RF, and I'd put in the RA, residential apartment, is also similar. It behaves the same as the RF, basically. So you have the single family zone of the residential house zone, and then you have RF, and they have slightly different rules when you're adding that second unit. First of all, you might want to look up your zoning. It's very easy to just go to the DC, just Google DC zoning map, and then enter in your property's address, and then you can find out what your zone is. And then you can click on here. It says, this zone is for R2. Then you would click on the R2, and then it would describe what that zoning is. So that's the first place to start, is just to learn about the zoning for your property. And I just want to make a couple of distinctions here. This slide is about accessory buildings and accessory apartments. They're not the same thing, but one might be inside the other. So basically, in the garage here, in the big blue, the little blue building in the back is an accessory building. It's a garage, but technically under the DC zoning, it's considered an accessory building. You could have an accessory apartment in an accessory building. That would be the case of the R zone. You would have, that would be an ADU in the garage. If you were in the RF zone, it would actually just be considered a second principal dwelling. And as we're also very familiar with basement apartments, if you're in an R zone, that basement apartment would be considered an accessory apartment or accessory dwelling unit. And if it's in the RF zone, it would simply be a second principal dwelling. You don't need to read this chart. And in fact, I need to update it, but we wanted to, in the manual, we wanted to give lots of charts and illustrations to help people visualize and make sense of the zoning code, in not just read it in a narrative form. So, but we have to, there's a couple of changes, as Ernesto mentioned, that we need to update. And in fact, this is actually the update that I'll be posting, which Ernesto blessed the other day as being accurate, which is, and zoning is so complicated. So what happened in the case 2019 made a couple of clarifications and some changes. So one of the clarifications that we were talking about earlier is that the required rear yard, you see in the middle of this image, is measured from the back of the dwelling towards the back of the lot. And that is what the required rear yard is. And it's 20-25 feet for an R zone property. And it'll be different for an RF zone property. In that zone, you really aren't allowed to build anything. I think maybe a shed. It's very small. Ernesto can answer that question. But you're basically supposed to have your accessory building outside of that. I think you probably have to go to the BZA, to the Board of Zoning Adjustment, if you are encroaching on that required rear yard. However, the things that the Zoning Commission did to expand, loosen the rules a little bit, make it a little bit more flexible, is one, it made the alleys, the offset, the accessory building where you might have an accessory unit or a second principal dwelling, that the offset is now only 7.5 feet from the alley center line. Previously, I got to move my, I hope you can't hear my son practicing his cello. He's getting much better. So the center line setback went, the alley center line setback went from 12 feet down to 7.5 feet. And the other thing that changed was the height, the maximum height for that accessory building was allowed to go from 20 feet to 22 feet. And so those are the most significant changes. Plus, basically clarification, you're really not allowed to build that building in the required rear yard. So that, and we'll post this, this updated graphic, which helps explain this stuff in a visual sense. That's what I hope people have a little bit more sense of RF versus R zone. And that's really what I wanted to communicate to folks. And that is the end of my little presentation. Thank you. And we'll take questions at the end. We'll put them in the chat.
Thank you. Thank you, Cheryl. Thanks for walking us through the minutia of zoning, especially as it relates to ADUs. So whilst I'll give Elena just a couple seconds to prepare, I want to let everyone know we have a poll this evening. We'd love to hear from you. There's a poll in the chat. Let us know if you live in DC and what ward specifically. And if you don't live in DC, let us know as well. And if you are a low or moderate homeowner and you're interested in assistance for building an ADU, please let us know. And if you're a homeowner in general and you're interested in building an ADU on your property and renting it to a low-income tenant, we would love to hear from you, yes or no, a soft poll. Thank you so much to everyone that is participating, and we'll turn it over to Ileana.
Let's just give it a couple more seconds to see our poll results here because they're coming in.
Just quick questions. Can you see my presentation right there?
Yeah, well, yes, except for it has a poll on top of it, I think, right?
Okay, okay. You tell me when to get started, and I hope my dog doesn't start barking or anything crazy, because that's pretty typical too.
Aisha, can you try to screenshot the poll? I don't know how we record. I'm not a Zoom wizard, so I'm not sure how we record
No worries.
the poll.
I think we can go on and folks can fill in.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, so my name is Elena Schindler. I'm an architect, and I've been doing a lot of additional dwelling units here in the region, mostly in Washington, D.C., but also in Montgomery County. So if there are any folks in Montgomery County there, don't despair. They're becoming more and more popular in Maryland as well, and same with Virginia. One of the important things to realize about building codes and zoning code is the most important thing, which Cheryl just explained, is a zoning code. It's everything that has to do with the building envelope and the outside, the relationship with the neighborhood, with the rear yard, with the limits, with the alley. I'm going to focus on this presentation on the architectural features of an additional dwelling unit. And those are regulated by the building code. But the thing is, when you think about additional dwelling units, both rules, both the zoning rule and the building rule must work together. And this is what architects do so well. We understand how both rules will work well. Here's my daughter. Okay, so perfect timing. Sorry about that. So how both rules, the zoning and the building will work together. And one thing that I want to clarify, when we talk about zoning, don't think it's a yes/no proposition. Most times there is a way to design buildings to comply with the code by right, or there are processes you can follow, either asking for exemption or variances that will allow you to develop an additional dwelling unit in your property, right? Most times you can do that. Of course, I mean, talk with somebody, you can call me or other architects that will explain very quickly if your project is feasible or not. That's why I want to focus on the first thing, which is the most popular additional dwelling unit feature, is the basement. Most people look at the basement and they say, I don't need it, I'll never use it, I want to dedicate it to be in another dwelling. The first thing I look at is, what's the ceiling height? By building code for additional dwelling units, you need 7 feet clear for the majority of the space. That don't worry if your beams are a little lower, if you have ducts or things like that, because you can have lower points, but the general space of an additional dwelling unit has to be 7 feet. The same goes for an attic. If you have an upper floor, it's like, hey, I want to convert my attic into an ADU. Make sure that your ceiling height is sufficient. Even if it isn't, we can start exploring. Should we excavate? Should we apply for an exemption? Last year, I had an ADU approved that was 6 feet, 10 inches, and it was almost finished. So Dcra agreed, hey, asking these people to excavate for 2-inch clearance, it's too onerous. So it was approved as an exemption. It turned out like a great apartment. The next condition for an additional dwelling unit, let's see if this works. Okay, it's egress, access and egress. When you have an apartment within another property, you have multiple units, you must be able to get in and out safely. The easy way to understand it is the windows, you need 2 points of egress. One is a door, obviously, which is a door you get in. And also you need another window that people can get out or somebody can get in to rescue others. Third dimension, this is the easiest image to Google, which is the dimensions of a window that you need to have to get in and out. It has to do with the operation of the window, with, if it's double hung or if it's basement, how high it is from the floor, what clearance you have in a window well. This is a feature, it's very easy to achieve. Even if you have windows are too small, you put a window well, it's not very complicated to build. So don't worry if the space you have now doesn't comply egress-wise, right? For example, we can't have bars, fixed bars on the outside. That's another feature people forget. Also, this presentation, probably we can share. Just email me if you want this presentation. I'm happy to share it. Another thing that additional dwelling unit has to have, and this is a tricky one that varies a lot between Montgomery County, DC, and Virginia, and is the separation of mechanical. So even if your project is your additional is in the basement or is in the garage or in the attic, the person living in that space must have complete control of their environment. So you have to have separate mechanical systems. You can't have like a thermostat in one apartment and the furnace in another. They have to be separate as a matter of comfort, as a matter of safety. So each of them, so what we do most times is the main house will maintain their furnace, forced air system, and then the smallest space will have some sort of split system, something that's cheaper. It's a little bit tricky to design because the mechanical unit of one apartment cannot be within the other. So not only the comfort level must be accessible, but also the access to the mechanical system. To change a filter, to repair. You can't go into the other person's house to access this feature. So most times when we close a stair between the main house and the basement, we occupy the space that was under stairs to put the mechanical system, if that's feasible. But yeah, they have to be separate. The other thing is electrical. It's kind of like the same idea that you will have completely separate systems between the main house and the additional dwelling unit. The main house will have the panel, the additional dwelling unit will have a sub panel. It will be located in the basement if that's where the additional dwelling is, or in the garage. Again, same concept. If you blow a fuse, or if you need to cut power, or in case of an emergency, you can't access the other person's house to access your own electrical power. Most times we collaborate with an electric engineer to help us lay out safely both units. This is not a matter of space, it's a matter of like how the circuits are run in the house. Again, it's another feature that distinguishes a single family home versus a two houses within one property, is the electrical system. Another thing is plumbing. Again, we talk about mechanical, we talk about electrical, plumbing as well. You need to have heating systems, and this is a controversial topic that it may change in the future. Again, plumbing must be either completely separate, one for each unit, or the same water heater must be accessible for both units, right? So if the water heater breaks and one person's on vacation, then the tenant can access and repair it without going into the main unit. For very, very small apartments, we always try to use tankless heaters if we have enough power load to supply it, or we use gas-powered tankless, or if we have the space, we put a traditional water heater, which is not complicated at all. It's significantly smaller. The additional dwelling units kind of basic. We need to have cold and hot water. You must have every plumbing functioning, so bathroom, kitchen, that fire separation. This is a big deal. This is a big deal in a good way. Both units need to be fire separate. This means, write this down, or ask me later. Again, you can always email me about this kind of stuff. I'm always happy to explain. You need a continuous layer where fire nor smoke will travel from one space to the other. Somebody at Dcra explained it to me very simply. He said, you cannot share air between units. And this goes for smoke, or goes for the smell of fish or whatever. You should be able to be safe on each unit. Practically speaking, this is a continuous layer of drywall, for example, between a basement and an upper unit. You cannot have connecting stairs. You cannot have connecting doors. You cannot go between one unit and another with a single door. You can have a vestibule that goes to the outside, but you cannot connect between two units. Think about additional dwelling units like a mini condo building. In order to access the other unit, you must go through a space that will connect to the outside. It's a long explanation in the code, but basically picture it like that. So the layer of drywall cannot be interrupted by, say, perforations in the ceiling, like recessed lighting. So if you have recessed lighting, it needs like what's called kind of a hat. So smoke and fire will not travel within the structure. So many times that when I see additional dwelling units that have been done poorly, you realize that they didn't pay attention to that kind of detail, and every light fixture needs to be ripped down, properly sort of hatted. I don't know what the technical word is. So we will comply with fire requirements. And again, we need to have, now the topic of sprinkle is something that I will not go in because it's very complicated. I have lots of fights about this with Dcra, and I'm not gonna, we cannot talk about it because it's so nuanced that I may end up giving the wrong kind of advice to wrong people. It has to do with zoning, it has to do with the technical features of the house, plumbing, water capacity. So for now, we're going to table that. If you have particular questions about fire protection of an additional dwelling unit, email me and I will look at your particular case. Again, we're not going to touch that. It's a super hot topic that I spent a lot of nights crying over that. Gray hair, I'm not sure if you can see it, but it has to do with that particular topic. Okay, so you need smoke detectors, carbon monoxide alarms, which is like you can have in a normal house, right? Think about additional dwelling unit, not like a mini house or nothing weird. It's just a house that has to be safe and sound like any large house. So anything that has to do with infrastructure has to work as well as a large home. The next one is area distribution. No matter how small we try to do it, there's certain requirements that the building code, thus Dcra, requires us to complete. For example, if you're going to have a bedroom and you want to call it bedroom, it needs to be 70 square feet. If you're going to have a kitchen, it has to have all the features to be a kitchen. Certain built-in appliances, doesn't matter the size, but you can't just have a hot plate and call it a kitchen. You can have an under-counter refrigerator, that's not a problem, but you have to have it. So we can play all the efficiencies we want, but there's a point where it can't shrink. Like you need 70 clear. If you're going to have stairs, have multiple, like a garage where we have space. Well, both spaces need to have 7 feet clear. You need to have stairs that are safe to go in and out. So like a ladder is not a stair. So there are a lot of things that have to do with area distribution that we can tweak with design, but we can't break rules, right? Like a skylight is not an egress, things like that, that they look good. Sometimes when I watch this like HGTV shows, they're fun to watch, incredibly unsafe. Don't do what they do, which is fun, but I don't enjoy the show. Anyway, I should watch more Say Yes to the Dress instead of HGTV. There's some requirements that have to do with how many people you can fit legally, which is 2 people in 220 square feet and 3 people of 320. It's very, very crowded. So that's kind of to state the obvious, like don't put 3 beds in 320 square feet. But anyway, so that has to do with the area distribution. So we can make it fun, but it has to work. With the bathroom, lots of clearances with bathroom that we need to respect. Equipment, like I was mentioning, dwellings have to have all equipment to make life feasible. Everything has to be fixed. And you can't have a cooler, it has to have a refrigerator. you can have a stovetop as small as you can. It can be a 2-burner that you built in. The appliances can be significantly smaller. This apartment is a studio where all the appliances are just 24 inches. It looks big. It's a very well efficient, like the kitchen works very well, but everything is significantly smaller, but it complies. You know, the outlets are with GFCI. So everything is by code.
Juliana? Can you face and speak directly into your computer?
Oh, sorry. I have the presentation on my other screen.
Oh, I see.
Sorry. So I can see the,
It's
anyway.
like a microphone issue. Okay.
Sorry. So the next thing is green code. So Washington, D.C. and pretty much every other jurisdiction now requires that we follow environmental rules. And this is a very, very good thing. This avoids people just throwing, 2x4s and calling it home. Green code, what it does, it creates a safer environment, but also an environment that consumes less energy to run. So you need certain efficiencies for walls, for roofs, for appliances. You can't just, throw a, diesel burning heater and call it a day. No, it has to run up to certain standards. The green code didn't used to be as strict, but now it is very, very strict. So it avoids also somebody says, oh, I'm going to buy a mobile home in Florida and I'm going to bring it here, plop in my backyard and call it a day. The requirements that your building will need to fulfill to be approved in DC, in this region, that has to do with environment, structure, like you need to have foundations, you need to have connections to plumbing. It makes certain sort of funny buildings not work well by code, and for safety as well. This is the building I was showing you earlier. It was a garage we converted. Like I said, it's very, very small, but everything is by code. What you see above the bathroom is some space. It's not a sleeping area, it's a storage. Because we couldn't access it, we didn't have the space for the stairs, so we had to keep everything one level, and that ladder became a point of storage, but there was almost no closets in this space. Also, another funny thing, closets are not a code requirement. Bedrooms need to be 70 square feet, but you don't need a closet to call it a bedroom. Call it a bedroom, you need 70 square feet, a smoke detector, egress window, and a fixed element for heating. You don't even need air conditioning. So if you have all that, you have a bedroom, not a closet. Anyway. So that is also an image of that garage we converted. This project was in the Washington Post. That was pretty cool. It was a kind of a garage, but a maintenance place that we're able to keep the envelope. I've done a few more of these. You can see them in my website as well. The images there. This was a basement that we converted in Capitol Hill. Again, we did everything we had to do. It was just very small, so it became a studio instead of a 1-bedroom because we didn't have enough points of egress to satisfy the 1-bedroom requirement. And another thing, I'm about to finish, I want to say that feel free to email me, call me. Email me is the best way to reach me. I know that every project has a ton of particular questions that doesn't always look so obvious up to code. It doesn't mean that your project's not feasible. I prefer that you guys call me and I tell you, then you start prejudging your own property. Oh, we can't do it because of this, because of that. I'm sure that if you're really interested in a project like this, between UPO, coalition, and the city, we can find it a way to make it work. And we match like the budget you may have, the timeline, the scope, and make sure that that project happens. Another thing, because I was so excited that this is the first presentation of the year, and I hope it's not the last one, I want to let you know that the book I wrote last year is out, and I'm super happy to invite people to participate in a raffle. I'm giving away 5 books. So the instructions are there. Write an email with your information, and on Friday, I think on Friday or on Monday, so do it before Friday, and on Monday, we're going to have a raffle and going to send them all out. And again, if you have a question you want to ask, do it. If you just want the book and don't want to talk to me, it's also fine. Make sure you email admin in my office, and we'll put you in the list. We're looking for software to do this raffle. The most important thing I want you to know is like these additional dwelling units are never a yes/no proposition. It's always a how. How can I make it work? Do I have a basement? Do I have a backyard? Do I have an attic? Is it the right way to do it? No two projects are the same. No two lots are the same. Not to, when we look at prefab structures, all this kind of stuff, like that is a later solution. The most important stuff is to know how we can make what we need work for us. That is the thing. Many times the project's not feasible and it's fine. There's no guilt in that. But I want you to be open-minded that probably the idea of what you're thinking is feasible, but we need to know how to make it feasible. That is the most important part.
Awesome, fantastic. Thank you, Eliana.
No problem.
So many great details. There's no surprise. They call you the queen of ADUs. Thanks for sharing your knowledge with us this evening. I see a lot of questions. Thanks everyone for dropping them in the chat. We will try to get to as many.
One thing, Didi, I want to suggest, if we can copy and paste those questions, I'd be happy to answer them in writing after. If not, we're going to be hours here. I want to make sure also that I'm not skipping anyone, and that also if whatever I'm saying the right thing. So if we could put a Google Doc and then distribute among everyone, I'm happy to issue them in writing.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Eliana. I think that would be so helpful.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. I don't know how the dynamic of this thing is.
Yes, if you wouldn't mind stop sharing.
Okay, there you go.
I want to assure everyone that we will email the presentations to everyone that has registered for the Zoom workshop tonight. So never fear, you'll get all of this rich information via email once this is done. And thank you, Eliana, for that as well. And so now I want to turn the tables over to our technician, Ernesto Warren. Thank you so much for making time to share with us this evening. I believe we are ready for you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Can you guys hear me? Great. Hello, and I'm surprised how much everybody here knows about the zoning codes. They're always full of surprise. This is a presentation that my supervisor prepared last year for, and there's two changes that have occurred after the 2016. There are new zoning codes that are important for you to know. Let's go through this presentation. This is the mission of Dcra is support a thriving community of residents and businesses, visitors through diligent protection of health and safety and equitable administration of regulation and compliance in our district. This sounds very government. Well, in plain English is we have to make sure that through housing, you are having a healthy and safe life. We don't want you to have an accident in your house or have stuff that can affect your daily operation of your home. And that's why Dcra has all these crazy rules that can sometimes overwhelm people and homeowners. But like the previous panelists that said, we are here to help you out to find a solution to your issues. I want to say that I've seen a lot of important questions in the chat, and there's one that I had to call my supervisor to ask that everybody's asking, and when questions time comes, we're going to talk about it. So a little bit of this background, I've seen my presentation. This was said already. So in 1958, the zoning regulations were created in accessory apartments. We call them accessory apartments at that time, that were allowed in only as a special exception in the R1B zoning district and the R3 and some of the R districts. In 2016, the zoning commission came with this new set of rules, zoning rules, in which we allow what the districts allow anybody that lives in the R district to have an accessory apartment or have an accessory apartment in the basement or in the attic or in the first floor, or having outside of the main building in an accessory building. Those are the two differences. And a dwelling unit in the district is any space that has provisions for sleeping, living, food preparation, and sanitation. So it doesn't have to be designated as it. And also very important, a separate entrance. When we're reviewing plans for accessory apartments, if we check the lower level or the attic or any of the levels, in a single family home, you can only have one kitchen. So if you have this setup that looks like a dwelling unit anywhere in the house, the district has to consider it and has to classify it as something else than the separate dwelling unit. We call it an accessory use, and that is why accessory apartments are called accessory. So it's an accessory use to the main use of the house. That's what's important to say here. A two-family flat is completely separate. Is a complete separate use, and the regulations are different, so we're gonna skip this for a moment. Accessory apartments. The rules for accessory apartments are all in subtitle U, section 253 of the zoning codes. It's title 11 of DC code, the zoning code. And you can access to them clicking on dcoc.dc.gov. There's a zoning map, there are regulations, and there's a PDF of the entire regulation, so you can apply easily find whatever piece of regulation you're looking for. One thing important to say here is there is only one accessory apartment allowed per property. You cannot have two accessory apartments in one lot. The only thing you can have is one main building and one main dwelling unit and an accessory dwelling unit in this case. The occupancy, and this is very important, and this is the question that I would have to contact my supervisor because it was a very challenging question. I don't like the answer, but that's what the regulation says. So either a principal or accessory unit must be owner occupied for the duration of the use. And this is very important here, this word, because if the owner moves out, the use has to be canceled. Because one of the conditions for an accessory apartment to be able to afford an accessory apartment is that you have to live there as a homeowner. You cannot have two rental licenses, or you cannot have two rental units in a house, in a dwelling in the R district, R1, 2, 3, mainly. So if you're, for example, if you buy a house today and tomorrow you want to set up an accessory use in the house, and in an accessory apartment, whether it's in the basement or in the rear in an accessory building, and for example, you have to go to New York, you have to move to New York to work, you have two chances. You have two options. Either you sell the property completely or you demolish the accessory use. And that is something I myself did not know, but that's how the district wants you to proceed. And I have to be honest, we don't have to like the regulations. I just work here and I have to apply the law the way it is. This is important too. In the R1, R1B, and R19, the minimum size of a dwelling to be able to have an accessory apartment unit in these three zones right here, and it's 2,000 square feet. In the R2, 3, R10, and forward is 1,200 square feet. The zoning administrator has determined that you can use the entire square footage of your house so you can have a better size unit. The code says GFA, which is gross floor area, and this is not the gross floor area does not include the lower level in some special conditions. Sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it don't. The zoning administrator has determined that if you want, in order to help homeowners to have a better size unit, they can use the entire square footage of the house regardless. So ignore the gross floor area concept that is in the zoning regulations. One thing that I wanted to make a difference, let me tell everybody that there's a difference between the R zones, the regular R1, 2, and R1, R2, and R3 in Georgetown. Georgetown is basically R19 and R20. When I say R19 is zone R19 and zone R20, which is mainly Georgetown. In those two zoning districts, you can only have 6 people living in one house, period. So you have to distribute the people in both units, either 3 or 3, and the homeowner has to live there as well. And accessory dwelling units in Georgetown are not approved by right. There has to be a process called a special exception. And that process is a little lengthy. It's not impossible. It's absolutely not impossible. We're not going to leave you alone in the process, but you're going to need probably a professional, an architect or an attorney to go through the process if you're not very well related with the zoning regulations. So for those who live in the R19 and the R20, this can come as bad news, but it's also not impossible. It's just a little lengthy and pricey because, of course, the fees of the zoning commission and the attorneys and the architects. Continue with our presentation. The matter of conditions for accessory buildings that will house units. The most important one is the size and the location. The size cannot exceed 450 square feet or a third of the required rear yard. And the required rear yard is not the entire backyard of your lot. It's 25 feet in the R districts. And you multiply those 25 feet for times the width of your lot, and that's the required rear yard. So whatever the width of your lot is, times 25, that's the required rear yard. When you do the operation and for example, you have a 433 square feet as a result of the third of your rear yard, you can obtain for 450 square feet, which is the maximum size of accessory dwelling unit. You're gonna have to have a too big lot to be able to build a dwelling unit, an accessory building that's greater or bigger than 450 square feet. Also, talking about the location, the accessory building cannot be located in the rear yard, in the required rear yard. We talk about this. There are no roof decks allowed. And like this presentation says, there's additional conditions for the R19 and the R20 zones. Then there's accessory buildings are also limited to 2 stories in 20 feet in height. This changed to 22. So now we allow the district allows 20 feet and 22 feet in height for accessory buildings. It used to have to be set back 12 feet from the center of the alley. Now that changed to 7.5. And like we said before, is the maximum building footprint shall be the greater of 30% of the required rear yard of 450 square feet, which is really small, but if you, there are options though, you can occupy both stories and so forth. This is a picture of an accessory apartment with access through the alley. And this is what we were talking about before. A potential separate dwelling unit, you don't have to have the wish to have a second dwelling unit. By the way you structure a space for the zoning regulations, it can't be a unit. For example, in this case, let me zoom in this a little bit. And we have a person that's proposing a wet bar, which is not a kitchen, but you can cook in a wet bar. If you have a sink and you have a hot plate, you can cook. So that's preparation of food. You have living space. You have a full bedroom and a full bathroom in a separate entrance. When you apply for a permit, you cannot say that this is not a separate unit. We will require you to file, if you want to have a space like this and you don't want to rent it, you have to file a zoning covenant prohibiting the use of a space as a separate dwelling unit, and it has to be recorded with the recorder of deeds, and you will not be able to get a license to rent this space. Returning to the next, let's go to the next. What they're showing here is, in this case, is the separate bathroom. And you can see also here, this is a different arrangement in the first floor. That people have the first floor and then they go through a separate unit on the second floor. That's allowed, but it has to be disclosed in the permit, in the permitting process. These are the website resources that we have, the Office of Zoning and Dcra website. And I think I'm ready for questions. Didi?
Thank you, Ernesto. Thank you so much for sharing such great information. Just as a reminder to everyone, these presentations with all of this information will be emailed after this. I think we have some questions that we can pull from in the chat. There's so many questions, so guaranteed we will not be able to get to everyone today.
Yeah, there's so many that I want to ask Ernesto and Ileana to be looking at the questions and sort of see things that you're like, oh, let me just, explain this to you. If you guys both want to sort of volunteer, I'm suggesting.
If I may.
Yes, please.
So the question that intrigued me was the one that somebody asked, with DC being so transient, what would you do if you move to a different state? You're not, as a homeowner, allowed to live in your house. We talked about it, and the answer, it might not be what you wanted, but that's what the city wants you to do. You have to basically demolish the use and just have a single family home, or just completely sell the house to another person who will have to deal with this issue now.
So Ernesto, do you mean demolish the use or demolish the unit?
The use. You don't have to demolish the property.
The building.
So
right.
just to clarify, Ernesto, just to clarify, this is a question I get all the time in my office. People call me up. It's like, well, I don't want to do it. I don't know where I'm going to be. I researched this when I wrote the book, and the natural trend, and this is something that I hope DC moves towards, the natural trend is to remove what's called the owner occupancy requirement. The owner occupancy requirement is a very, very old trend that grew out of fear from people that were like, oh my God, if we let owners move out after they develop an additional dwelling unit, what's going to happen? We're going to have absent landlords, and the property is going to be like not taken care of, and then the house is going to, like, the city is going to turn into a massive tourism center. It is proven that homeowner requirements as an experiment, what it does is discourages the development of property because people move a lot. So that is the background information. Right now, if you develop an additional dwelling unit in DC and you decide to move out of property, what it means is you'll still be able to rent only one, and the other property will remain empty. You will not get permission from the city to rent both spaces legally. That is what it means from a practical person. You don't have to take down the structure. You don't have to touch anything. You simply can't rent it. So it will sit empty while you're not occupying. It doesn't mean, say you have a 3-story house and a basement. You can say, hey, I'm moving. I'm going to rent the 3-story house, and I'm going to keep the basement empty when I come for visit the city, because that is considered owner occupant, even if it's transient. What it means is you don't get 2 certificate of occupancies. You're not going to get 2 leases. You're going to get 1. But you can still rent the main house and keep the little one empty. But again, this is something that cities and throughout California, which is like, and Portland and other areas, the owner occupancy requirement as a trend is being taken out of zoning. But in DC, that is still the rule.
Correct.
Yeah. And in terms of, like, it is on the docket for the zoning commission for this year to look at alley lots and accessory apartment rules. And we have sort of a short list of things that we specifically want to change. I think owner occupancy might be harder to change. But there's some other things on RF and RF zones that I think.
I know I always get in trouble when I talk directly to the city, and Cheryl is always like, don't talk about it, talk about it. But one thing that I've learned writing the book and working with people every day is there's always like a hesitancy on investing and developing, because nobody knows where we're all going to be in 2, 3, 5 years. And it's a trend, right? It's like, when you see it coming, it's like, hey, look, this is something that other people are doing and the world doesn't come to an end. But right now, the rule is if you have 2 units, whether it's called an additional dwelling unit, a secondary apartment, whatever name you're going to give it, if you move out, you can only rent 1. A lot of my clients, what they say, hey, look, I'm going to live in another city, but I want to keep this little studio in the basement available for me when I come and visit relatives, or because I come to DC on a monthly basis, I don't want to have to rent to a hotel. So for a lot of people, it still works, the fact that they can only rent 1.
Yeah, another question was, can you have a dwelling in a carriage house? Does it, like in the RF zone? And you can if it's an existing building. However, if there's new construction to expand on the building, or if it's new construction, like you just build a new building, that actually is not a matter of right under the 2016 zoning code. However, you can go to the BZA and ask for permission to do that. I don't know if you've actually done that. I think
I've done it. I've actually applied for an exemption in an RF zone in New York Avenue, very, very small studio, and we got approved. It was a studio on top of a garage. It's getting built in there, I think, this year. We just went to board of zoning. I said, hey, this was like, and I just want to explain something. Not only was approved, but what I found with Board of Zoning and Dcra in general is like, they're not in the business of stopping people from doing what is good for the city. Aside from the owner requirement that we can talk about it for hours, but the important thing to understand is that if you can prove that your project is not going to ruin anyone's life, Board of Zoning is likely to say, yeah, go ahead, do it, right? When zoning commission and the city and the mayor and whoever, they set rules, they have to make rules somewhat for the majority of lots. But it's also the understanding that not all lots will comply. And even those people that want to get more creative, they have the right to pushing the rules a little bit. And so every time I say, oh my God, I need an exemption for this, an exemption for that, they look at, if they don't let you do what you need to do, will it be detrimental for the city? Many times I say, hey, you can't do a curb cut here. And you go and ask them, it's like, hey, you know what? Actually, we're going to let you do it even if it's against the rule, because your lot is so weird. So don't be too afraid, but also don't try to break the rules first. Let's see what we can comply with. And then if we can't, then we go and ask for permission.
Thank you, Ileana. And thanks for the encouragement. A lot of people don't know that you can actually apply, even if the rules say one thing.
I'm saying it's easy or fast, but if you think it's the right project for you and you have the patience and you have the good strategy, I mean, this is not like going to the Supreme Court. This is something that it's a bunch of people, they're very creative, they want to encourage, they want good for the city. And if you go with those intentions, you're likely to get approved. I mean, I do get a lot of gray hair over that, but that's my job.
I also think it would increase the value of your property, even if you're gonna move. Like if you do it, you will sell your property for more.
Good point. Good point. Thank you, Ernesto. I had one question that I thought really applied to a lot of people. It says, I am a new homeowner with a basement apartment that I know needs some work to be brought up to code, but I don't know what it needs. Does Dcra do something like set up a consultation ahead of time so that I know what needs to be done to bring it up to code?
Okay. If you live in an RF, for example, and it's a second unit, the only thing that Dcra will allow you to do In this case, we don't have inspectors to go and commission just to go and see what was not in compliance. But for example, if the only case when DCRA will send someone will be if you have in the F1, 2, or 3, or 4, and you have a second unit that doesn't have it's not included in your certificate of occupancy, or DCRA will send an inspector once you apply for the CFO. And the inspector will give you a list of things that you have to fix in order to be a complete separate lawful unit. Other than that, I think the best thing is consult with an architect or with a professional for in case of accessory dwelling units, because DCRA will not send an inspector there. In case some of your neighbors call, if you said that somebody says the unit is being rented and doesn't have a second means egress, for example, then DCRA will come with full force to protect the consumer. But there's no such a protocol as of yet.
Again, there are a lot of answers that can be found online very easily, like egress or basic requirements. However, if you're going to design and build, and this is something I was trying to type the answer, might as well say verbally. If you're going to design and build a dwelling unit, which is a house, you need to understand exactly what are the requirements and responsibilities of the architect or the designer and engineer, whoever you hire to actually make the drawings. And then that is what DCRA will review. They will give you permission to build it after you show them you know what you're going to do. And then during construction, DCRA will play basically the eyes and ears and say if the project is being built like it was approved by the permit. So it's DCRA doesn't play. DCRA won't tell you what to do, but DCRA will make sure that what you said you were going to do, you're doing it. Like insulation. Before you do anything, you have to show them that you're going to insulate the walls properly, or the roof, or that your water heater will have enough capacity for that house. They're not going to tell you that. Like any architect, any designer, any engineer will know that. So it's not nothing to build a house, but you have to draw it first, right? You can't just like start throwing drywall and hope it works. Everything works at the end. I think Annette asked that question. Annette, I was typing your answer and I hope I address it. So Michael Brown here is talking about the preliminary design review meetings. I've been through those, and what it is, the preliminary design meeting is basically a meeting that you have with somebody, mostly from zoning and not from other disciplines, that will tell you if what you want to do, you can do. Those are paid. I always reach out to those when even I have doubts about what is feasible or not from my own designs, and they always give you very good opinions if they think that your project is likely to be approved or sent through the Board of Zoning adjustment. Again, the process is not scary, but you need to be a little familiar with the alternatives. The easiest process is to convert a basement into an apartment, but even then, there are things like the division between units, like everything that is between the spaces, that's where the details matter a lot.
I just want to clarify something. Michael Brown has a good point here, and thank you, Elena. There is two types of PDRMs. There is a zoning PDRM, and there is a building code PDRM that also includes zoning if you request it. And I never seen an accessory apartment in this all hands PDRMs. Those PDRMs are for like big buildings, so big projects like 100 units in an apartment building. However, if you come to zoning with your PDRM, we might be able to give you referrals to other disciplines, so you can ask your questions about egress. And that is a good, thank you, Mr. Brown, for bringing that to our attention, because I completely forgot about that. PDRM is an option. And zoning, we try to be as friendly as possible, and we will contact other disciplines in order to give you a full response, even though we're not we're only zoning, so.
Cheryl, any other questions you think we can ask?
Yeah, well, I was, Michael has, I was gonna see, Mike, if I could unmute you, go find you, and so he's saying that the preliminary design review meetings are also for building codes. And so Mike, when I find you, I'll unmute you. What this meeting, there's a fee, there's some fee attached to it. It's not crazy, and it's really what DCI recommends that you do before you spend, any amount of money, basically, potentially a lot of money on trying to, develop plans and sort of go through the process. And so the first thing you need to do really is to talk to DCRA, to zoning officials, and maybe building code people as well, in order to, oh, we've unmuted you, Mike. Do you want to just explain that? Because you've always been so emphatic about this. I feel like you're the messenger. Explain who you are and then just say. Mike?
Sure. Yes. Good evening. I always enjoy these meetings that you throw, Cheryl. So congratulations on another good meeting. A couple of things that I think are important.
Wait, say who you are so we know why we should be listening to you.
Oh, my name's Michael Brown, and I'm the manager of the Residential Plan Review Center at for DCRA. I'm also the head of the Green Building Department. So one of the things that we try to accomplish in the residential center, and along with our zoning partners, is to try and make it as easy as possible for homeowners to get what they want to do. And this preliminary design review meeting costs $75 and allows you to sit down with the zoning people and the building code people, and we can help map it out for you, what you're going to need. And in many cases, if you're doing an accessory dwelling unit, putting an apartment in your basement, it's not necessarily that difficult. And the other thing that is possible if you're doing the work in your basement is the District of Columbia Residential Code allows people, if they follow the code, there's a prescriptive pathway that they can submit their own plans and get them approved. And we have every day we have people who do that because they have simple work to do, they know what they're going to do, and they go about it. And they're capable, right? The second thing is you don't have to have a GC to do your work. You can be the general contractor. You just put that on the application that you're that person. You still have to have all of the, inspections as necessary, and the inspections are really there to make sure you've done things safely. So I'm a huge advocate of that preliminary design review meeting. $75. If the folks from zoning say you can't do it, or you're going to have to do X, Y, Z and go through the BZA, you may as well know it today, because the BZA is going to take what, Ernesto, 6 months?
It's about 3 to 6 months, depends on there's a streamline for residential projects, but I've always seen everything come back in no less than 4 or 5 months. So. Yeah. And the process is outside of DCRA. Is the Board of Zoning Adjustment is a part of the general office of zoning, but there's not much I can talk about that process because we don't handle it at the office of the zoning administrator. But it's like 3 or 4 months. It's not difficult. It's just a lot of paperwork, in a lot of meetings, and in a lot of sending and emails and mail, physical mail to your neighbors. With this, it's work, but it's nothing important. Nothing too difficult. It's not rocket science.
I just caught the question about a landlord not taking care of their property. I will put in the chat, call 311, tell them your problem with your landlord, and they will get it to the right people in our inspections department. And there are property maintenance requirements in the District of Columbia. So if they're in violation of that, they'll have to fix it. And our inspectors will go out and take a look at it. I see a thing, Carol, I'll put in the link for our contractor grading system. DCRA does not recommend who to use for design professionals or contractors, plumbers, electricians, whatever. We do have a grading system for all those groups, and I'll put that link in the chat for you.
One thing I want to say, it's easy, and I see Annette saying here, it's like, oh my God, this is like, these projects are massive and all that kind of stuff. This is an architectural project, obviously from my point of view, but I understand that it has a lot about financial planning and planning on where you want to live and how you want to live. The idea of talking with somebody that does a lot of these, like in many architects, so it's not just me, is that they give you the framework for you to think about not just of the complicated things, but also they ease the pass on other questions. So they'll ask you questions like, who's going to use this? And you can say, hey, I want a tenant, I want to get money, or like, I want my grandmother to move in, or I want my mother, or when I retire, I want to live there. And all those questions that an experienced professional will ask also will define the design you want. So if you want to retire in an additional dwelling unit and keep ownership of the property, the design that will result from it is going to be a one-story because you want to avoid stairs. So a lot of design questions don't come up of like, you know, hey, I thought of this would be fun and creative to do. The design answers are very, very specific of how you plan to use the property in the short term, in the long term. People are like, oh, I want to have as much house I can do, so it's as big as I can. I was like, well, how will that affect the yard? Will affect the natural light, will affect the views. So think about this project not just as a building itself, but how that building will work with your family, with your finances, with the city, because like an architect will have to solve all those things in one building. So when people sometimes panic about, oh my God, the exemption process, well, if you want a building that will exceed what the city allows, and it's the specific building you want, and you think it's still a good idea, we'll ask for that exemption. But if a building won't work for you, let's not ask for an exemption, because we're going to end up with a building that it's useless for the family, that we spent all this time and money, or that we can't afford. I mean, and you're going to know that before, like on the first 10 minutes of a call. I mean, with me, you'll know, but in general, you want to have like big ideas solved first. That has to do with budget, with timeline, and with scope. That kind of stuff are very, very easy to figure out very early in the process to see if additional dwelling unit is the type of thing you want to pursue.
Yeah, I want to note, Marcy Edwards asked, has anyone had any success with retrofitting a prefab that adheres to DC codes? Mike, do you want to talk about prefab construction?
I can
Okay.
say,
Well, Eliana
prefab.
give you yeah, go ahead.
I would say about the thing about prefab. Prefab is cool and cheap and awesome.
Oh, we can't unmute. Oh no.
No, this is the thing with prefab. Prefab is like buying a wedding dress off the rack that works. Once you have to make changes, it's very expensive and very complicated. So prefab works if what you buy is what you end up using. If the insulation, if the infrastructure and the structure of the prefab you're buying works for the region, that's great. If you need to go back and start adding insulation, improving electrical, adding plumbing, adding foundations, all that kind of stuff, you're better off doing not prefab, doing custom, because it's about 20 to 30% cheaper to do custom construction in this region than to do prefab by bringing with a crane and getting the crane permit, and you know, cables get cut in the alley and all that kind of stuff. So depending on the prefab you're planning to do, you want to do a cost comparison per square foot, then to, you know, it may work on your favor, but do that before committing to a prefab structure that then will need alterations, which is really a good financial idea.
But
for zoning, a prefabricated structure is just another.
Exactly.
we have no special rule for prefabs.
Right,
Mike,
for zoning.
Mike, did you want to say anything about prefab? I think you're on mute.
Sure. For prefabs are actually getting a little more popular in the District of Columbia, and really for two reasons. One, it's a package. You know, you buy a package, it's what you get, and that's what you're going to put in your yard, or what, you know, wherever you're putting it. There's second reason is a lot of folks really like the prefabs because of how energy efficient they are. Because they're manufactured in a controlled environment, they are extremely energy efficient. And there's a couple of fairly good projects on the books right now for multifamily that are all going to be prefab. And there's a few single family prefabs coming up in the district, but it is really about energy efficiency. People are going the prefab route. And also at speed at which you can get it.
You're hearing from DCRA, they are prefab friendly, but there's, you know, it's still a structure that needs to be approved.
Yeah, it's well, there's the thing about prefab housing is that once a firm is in the prefab business, there's actually a book that they put together of how that house has been constructed. And it's already been approved by building inspectors somewhere, and they ensure that they meet the building code. So while there's a different path, it's a bit of a different pathway for building construction code review. Yes, we're prefab friendly in the District of Columbia.
I think we've gone over quite a bit. I think that we might need to wrap up and save the chat. I will say that the manual that's on UPO's website, on CSG's website, and I'll do the update that I presented today, has actually answers a lot of these questions. We actually took a lot of material from Ileana, and so Ileana also has her own handbook that you can get from her. And so a lot of your questions actually can be answered through a manual, especially when we'll post the update so that you'll know a couple of these small zoning changes. But Edie, do you have any?
Yes, and I also wanted to know, thank you, Cheryl, for bringing up the update to the manual. We also will be including our 2 pilots and our 2 homeowners that have been through the process and what they thought, the lessons learned from their experiences as well. One of them is a homeowner that has a basement that was redone, and one was a prefab. And so very different experiences, and we'll be sharing that from a consumer perspective. Thank you for bringing that up, Cheryl. So no plans to do any pilots right now, but we're working and urging the city in their allocation of funding for ADUs. The city has allocated 1.5 million, and they're working on the program to roll that out. And as soon as we know, you will know for sure that that's our goal, to make sure that the community is aware of what is available. The last thing that I want to talk about, Cheryl, maybe you want to talk about our architect sessions for people that are interested in getting in touch.
Yeah, so this is really aimed at low and moderate income homeowners in particular to help you sort of move forward with your project, and to do one-on-one sessions with architects who are experienced like Ileana, to do a phone call, like a 15, maybe max 30-minute phone call to describe your project. And we're going to put together an intake form and then get that out to some good architects like Ileana. So watch for that.
A lot of good news coming on the ADU front. On that note, I want to thank everyone for hanging with us. We did go over. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you to our esteemed panel of experts. Ernesto, Warren, thank you indeed. Ileana, always a pleasure. Cheryl, thank you so much for co-sponsoring this. And our many panelists, Michael Brown, for also joining in and sharing his expertise as well about some of the resources that will be made available. Again, we will email the questions and the presentations, I should say. We will email the presentations to everyone on the chat, and we hope that this has been helpful. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions. We are here to help.
Great. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, guys. Stay in
Thanks,
touch.
everyone.
Aisha,
Hello,
I'm trying to figure out how to save the chat.
I saved it.
You did save it.
Mhm.
Great. Okay. Well, good night, everybody. Thanks so much. All right, then I'm signing off.